This is Into Healing, and I'm your host, Mira Adura. Today's Into Healing guest is Steph Adams. Steph's younger self powered through trauma and her family's chaotic life with will and control until the practice of yoga opened up a different way. With yoga as her guide, Steph stepped into her transformational healing journey and headed towards a lifelong dedication to teaching the profound benefits of trauma-informed yoga. She is passionate about fostering a safe, accessible, and sustainable practice for all. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and follow us for more transformational healing stories. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really glad to be here.
Let's start at the beginning. You had a difficult and complicated childhood. Do you mind walking us through a little bit of that so we understand kind of the context of how you grew up?
Yeah. So I was born to parents who were young, in the late 60s. And my dad was in a rock band. My mom was experimenting with drugs and expanded thinking, and they were just young. My dad likes to joke and say we were kids raising kids. And throughout that time, there was a lot of chaos and a sense of things suddenly happening and things changing all the time. And for example, we lived in 18 homes before I was 18. There were 7 different father figures that were involved in my life. Sometimes there, sometimes not there. My mom was mostly single, but with 3 daughters. And we were living the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. But for a child, I didn't have a lot of guidance on how to grow well and navigate that. There was sexual assault as a child, as a young woman. Things always felt like they were a lot chaotic and out of control. Suddenly, there would be a new man in our life. Suddenly, a man would leave from our life. Suddenly, we had a bodyguard. Suddenly, we had money. Suddenly, we had no money. Like just all of these things changed often. And my mom had, with all the drama, just didn't have a lot of attention and time for parenting and guidance. Yeah. I mean, she loved us. I felt loved, but I also often felt unimportant, neglected, abandoned, and without a parent. Yeah.
How did that chaos make you feel?
I didn't know how it made me feel for a long time because my drug of choice was alcohol. I started drinking alcohol very socially in middle school and did so pretty consistently for about 10 years. So when you are going through trauma in a life that doesn't have control and you feel scared, you cope. And my coping mechanism then was to numb and distract with being social and drinking alcohol. However, at the same time, I was determined to not live a life like the one I had growing up. And so at the same time that I was drinking and socializing, I also was very focused on school. I became class president. I got a 4.0. I was determined to go to college. I was the first person in my family to graduate from a 4-year college. My coping mechanisms were socialization, drinking, and success and control. And that success and control served me for a while. I didn't end up addicted and with consequences. But eventually it no longer served me.
You ended up working at a law office. How did you end up there?
Yeah, so like I said, from an early age, I was determined to do something that would get me away from the lifestyle I grew up with. And I thought, okay, what's something very successful? I'll be an attorney. And I got a degree in pre-law. I studied political science. I worked at law firms during my undergrad years in Seattle, and then got offered a great job as a paralegal based on a big case I was involved in, where I worked at that law firm for 10 years. My plan was always to go to law school, but the more I worked in law, the more I decided that wasn't my plan. And then I became a mother. And becoming a mother was a really powerful thing for me because of the negative teaching of my mother. I was determined to make sure that my children didn't experience what I experienced. So that was transformational for me. Around that time, shortly after I had my second child, I left the field of law and found yoga. And yoga was suggested to me by whom I call my bonus mom. She has a master's in psychology, so she saw somewhere that would be beneficial to me. And when I first tried yoga, I didn't really love it at first, and I didn't really understand how it was beneficial.
Why did you stick to it?
Yeah, so I just kept there was something there was some benefit that I didn't understand at that time. And I had a really amazing teacher named Janet. Something about it kept me coming back. And then now I understand what that is. Now that I've been practicing for 29 years, I understand that what was happening for me is I was starting to change my nervous system through the practice of yoga. And that was allowing me to create safe space to feel the feelings I had been not feeling. So what happens when you practice physical yoga with breath is you improve what's called your autonomic response. So your autonomic nervous system is your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight and your relaxation response. Well, when you practice physical yoga and you're challenged by a pose and you're guided by a teacher to breathe into that challenging moment, it helps you to build resiliency. So it helps you to meet a challenge with breath. And the more you practice that on the mat, the more that can help you off the mat when you are experiencing what we call triggers. So triggers for people who have experienced trauma are moments where the past is present. The past is here in your body, and you feel it right now, and you are becoming hyper or hypo-aroused. You're reacting in some way. I didn't understand any of this when I first started practicing yoga. I just knew that something within me was shifting.
So would you say that that's when you consciously started your healing journey, through the yoga, or was it through motherhood? Which one kind of came first?
I think that motherhood was, I think they were simultaneous. I don't think I could be as good of a mother as I can be without yoga. However, I think yoga has very much supported my ability to be a mother who is less reactive and more patient, and that's taken years of practice. However, being a mother was an opportunity for me to experience a family in a way that I had never experienced a family before, where there was stability. I was able, to love in a way that I'd never been able to love before. And I really was more interested in living a life of health for my children. And to really show them something different than what I knew. Yoga, however, the more I practiced, the more I learned that there's so much more to yoga than the physical practice. And once the physical practice allows our bodies to be able to be present and to have space for our feelings, then we can actually feel more. And the more we can feel, the more we can understand our feelings and become aware of our feelings. And if we're not aware of our feelings, we don't know what is causing us pain or struggle when it's causing us pain and struggle.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I was going to ask you how your relationship with yoga has changed over time, and I think you just basically answered it.
The first step is awareness, and that happens whether or not you know it's happening. Advanced yoga is advanced awareness. And so, like I said earlier, the more I was creating space for feeling, the more I was feeling, the more I was learning about the feelings that were still causing me pain, right? That I wasn't aware of. And I refer to these as the shadows of our psyche. And the first Yoga Sutra tells us that yoga is presence. The second Yoga Sutra tells us that yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations, the stories, the identities of the mind. So when the mind is clear and when we're present, we can start to see the wholeness of who we are. So the more I practiced, the more I started to realize that the coping mechanism I had developed of control and success had served me up to that point. I was, anyone would look at me and say that I was healthy and a success. But upon further practice and reflection, I started to realize that this coping mechanism of control and success had given me this very type A personality, which served me well in the law firm, but wasn't so great for my relationships, my ability to connect with other people, my ability to be patient as a parent. Yoga practice continuing over time helped me to see those things and to realize that if I am living a life that's too controlled, I'm working too much, I care too much about how I look, all of these things that really aren't that important, that I'm suffering still at some level. And so as I began to learn that control was an issue for me and that how that disempowered the people around me, and it wasn't serving my relationships, that was the first step. Awareness is the first step. The second step is acceptance. And so being able to accept that part of yourself. So we can become aware of something, but we can just numb and distract our way from that. Like, I'm just, okay, that feels icky, that feels shameful, that's vulnerable. I don't have the courage for that. I'm just gonna, drink a beer and forget about it, right? I had chosen a life of sobriety pretty early on. And so for me, no, those coping mechanisms weren't there. Yoga, breathing into my feelings and really fully feeling my feelings was how I was going to process and change and transform and grow. And so I started to learn that in order to really shift from awareness into transformation, there's a step of acceptance. And acceptance, again, takes courage and vulnerability. It's sort of like taking the shadows of your psyche and holding their hand and letting them into the light. If you do not love that part of yourself that you're pretending doesn't exist or you don't want to be aware of, you can't transform it. You have to love it. So eventually I've been able to be lighthearted about control. It doesn't mean that I don't still have a certain element of wanting to control things in my life. It even can be a joke now around my house about it. Like, I want things done a certain way or something, and then I just can let it go. All of us always are transferring our past into our present. But the power is when you realize that you're doing that. You're still going to do it. Your past is always going to be present in your life. But the awareness and the acceptance allows you to be more lighthearted around it, to recognize when you're doing it, and to take accountability, to move forward and to transform that.
So what's the third step? You said awareness and then facing our shadows. And what's the third one?
Yeah, so the third step is not really a step. It's what happens when we do the first two steps. So in yoga, there are two paths. There's the Maryada path and the Pushti path. And the Maryada path is the path of effort, and the Pushti path is the path of grace. So
Grace as in surrender?
Grace as in surrender. And I think of the Maryada path as doing the practice, showing up, continually opening yourself up to the present moment, and all the practices of yoga, not just asana. Breath work when you need it, grounding yourself when you need it, the yama niyamas, which are the first 2 limbs of the 8 limbs of yoga, which are really important.
Can you just tell
Yeah.
tell us
Let's
what
talk
that-
about 2 of them, because there's
Okay.
10. It can
Yes.
take a long time
Yeah,
to talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
all of them. So the yamas and niyamas are guidelines for living. They're the first 2 limbs of the 8 limbs of yoga. And the first limb is the yamas. And the first 2 yamas these are all Sanskrit words. Sanskrit is the oldest language we know of on earth. It's an Indo-European language, so it's within all of our DNA, most of us. The first yama is ahimsa, which means non-harm. And the practice of non-harming, to me, the first time I heard that was like, oh yeah, no problem. I'm not violent, right? But the reality is that non-harming, the practice of it is to find a right relationship with self and other for non-harm. So in difficult situations in our lives, this is whenever you're struggling on the path, going back to that first step of ahimsa is a big practice for me that my teacher Swami Omakarnanda taught me. And so in a difficult situation, how do I understand how I can set healthy boundaries for myself, and also so that I'm not being harmed, but also make sure that I'm being kind and honest with someone else. The second yama is honesty, satya, authenticity, honesty. Knowing ourselves well allows us to know what we want. Like, we don't know what we want. We can't set healthy boundaries if we don't know ourselves well. We can't show up for ourselves in a way that is whole if we don't know ourselves well. So when we're on the Mariana path, we're practicing these things: breath, presence, non-harm, honesty. There's a lot more on the path. But on the Pushti path, that's when we're sort of relaxing into life and trusting. Now, I had developed a coping mechanism early in life that's based on control, which is the opposite of trust.
Trust, yeah.
So trust is something that yoga has taught me, and really through a lot of practice, to be able to trust myself, to be able to trust other people, to be able to trust life. And so the Pushti path, interestingly enough, is sort of the third step, grace. Like, once you're aware, once you accept, the universe supports you. You can't not remember what you've become aware of. The Yoga Sutras even say this, that whenever you practice, you are forever a little bit changed. You can't not know what you're already aware of. So a few years ago on New Year's, my teacher gifted me with a Sanskrit name. And the Sanskrit name he gifted me with was Pushti. Well, when I was a young child, my grandfather nicknamed me Calamity Jane. And the reason he nicknamed me Calamity Jane was because every time I was showing up to family functions, I had a bump or a bruise. Well, as you know, I had young parents and I was often unsupervised. And my aunt shared with me that I fell out of a moving vehicle 3 times before the age of 5.
Oof.
And one time I showed up to a family function and I had a big black eye, and my grandpa said, how did that happen? And apparently I had walked in front of a moving swing set and was hit in the face. And so he nicknamed me Calamity Jane. So my whole life, I always thought I was clumsy. This is my nickname. The stories and identities we take on as children, we believe to be true. And when I started teaching and practicing yoga and people would refer to me using the word grace, I never could believe it. Like, that's not me. I'm Calamity Jane. So when I was gifted that name, Pushti, Sanskrit words usually have many meanings, but the word Pushti means divine nourishment, grace, or the path of grace, to nourish or to be a good gardener. And I'm not really a good gardener, but I have come to feel like grace is my path. I've relaxed more into life through the practice of yoga. I used to feel like when you're in a trauma state, you experience highs and lows much more dramatically than other people. Now, I live a life of much more equanimity and freedom and joy. My first yoga teacher, I reconnected with her not too long ago, and she said something about I'm living a life where I'm pointing my nose in the direction of joy. And I feel like I've finally arrived at that place after 29 years of practice where joy is my practice. And coming from a person who's always pushed myself to be worthy of love and belonging through success and achievement and control, prioritizing joy is huge. It doesn't mean I still don't work a lot. It doesn't mean that I still don't have moments when I'm triggered. But it means that when those things happen, I can be aware of them and remember where those feelings are coming from. For example, one of the things that people who've struggled with abandonment or neglect experience is when somebody changes plans on you, or someone shows up late to a meeting, you start to have this fear of being abandoned that comes from your childhood. And for a while, I never realized that I would be angry at a partner or a friend, but there really was no problem. Like if I really could be in the present moment and focus on my breath and realize that this is my child self, not my now self, like I'm perfectly happy in this coffee shop, enjoying myself. Like there's nothing wrong with being here 10 minutes longer than this person arrived. To realize the reality of what's happening versus how my past is influencing me. And I attribute that all to yoga philosophy, yoga practice. I don't think we touched on yet that the physical practice of yoga, Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, says that we can only transform our trauma about 50% through talk therapy. The rest we have to experience in the body. Yeah. So that was happening early on, and I didn't really understand that. But that's definitely contributed to helping me to be able to come to these later realizations.
Yeah. Two questions kind of bubbled to the top as you were talking. The first one was, is it possible to heal when we're still being traumatized?
I think it depends on what kind of support we have. And I don't mean just support of people, but support of practices too. Because, as an adult, of course, I've experienced new traumas, right? And however, having the practice of yoga, having the support of my family has helped me to overcome those. About 6 months ago, I had a cancer scare and wanted to have organs removed, half of my pancreas and my spleen, and ended up having a bunch of complications. It was a really scary, trying time. But I feel I feel more grateful to be alive than ever. I feel healthier than ever. I feel like I've recovered fairly quickly through that. And I just feel like when my mom passed, I had a completely different experience of that than I think I would have if I hadn't had a regular practice. So yoga isn't the only way. There are other ways to bring mindfulness into your life that will bring you awareness and acceptance and the grace of transformation. But for me, it's been a way that helped me to, the physical practice first, create that space for feeling, and then for the subsequent awareness and acceptance and transformation to happen. And then, but I think if you're being re-traumatized and you don't have support, I think it would be really, really challenging to be able to heal. If you don't either have a practice or a community to rely on, it's hard to build that resiliency. It's possible, I'm sure. Therapy, there's a million ways to build resiliency. One of the really powerful ways is breath. And that's something that we all have access to every moment. One of the practices I do is nose breathing, long, whole, complete nose breathing that emphasizes the exhale and trying to get that exhale at least 6 seconds out, 6 seconds in. When we do that, we uptake more nitric oxide, which is a powerful healing molecule in our bodies that lowers our blood pressure, improves our energy and brain flow, and helps to improve our immunity as well. So there are things that we can do that everybody can do, but I think it would be really challenging if you didn't have any of that support.
Yeah. I think, the reason I thought of that question is because I grew up in wars. So for me, I just think about like you're in such fight or flight survival mode that like how can the healing happen when you're really just trying to survive, And that's what kind of I was like, is it possible, or do you have to like get through that in order to start on that journey? And that's been kind of just something that's been really like bubbling for me.
Yeah. Did you have any experiences of any practices that were
Not when I was young, no.
Yeah.
No, I discovered, probably in my mid-20s is when I discovered yoga. So when I was young, I didn't know any of the mindfulness tools. I feel we talk about them now way more than we did,
Yeah. And I think that there are simple tools that are available to us right now. One of the most simple tools, if you want to go through it really quickly, it's super simple.
Sure.
Okay. So 2 feet on the ground. It's 4 parts. I learned it in trauma-informed yoga training. And it's root, rise, soften, breathe. So we're going to root through our feet in our seat, and then rise through your center, soften any tension you're aware of, and then long, deep breath through your nose. You can have your eyes open, you can have your eyes closed, but long, deep breath through your nose. So when we root, it grounds us, and our exhales are very grounding and relaxing, softening. When we rise, it gives us a feeling of empowerment. We're here now in this body, in this breath, in this moment. So each long exhale through your nose is whispery, you can hear it, and you're softening any tension in the body as you feel grounded. And each inhale, you're rising and lengthening, feeling empowered in this moment. The average person walking down the road, average modern stress person, is breathing just 2 to 3 seconds in and 2 to 3 seconds out. That's half of our optimal health breathing. 5 to 6 seconds in, 5 to 6 seconds out is optimal. So just anytime, anywhere, grounding through your feet, grounding through your seat, taking whole, complete breaths is one of the most powerful things we can do. And the therapist that I learned this technique from, I've modified it slightly. She uses this in treating her trauma-informed patients, clients. So it's something I teach in all my yoga classes as a introductory breathing meditation, because I feel like there are so many people who have experienced trauma or who are experiencing trauma.
Currently. Yeah, for sure. The other question that kind of bubbled to the top was when you're talking about control, and I can totally identify with like control and chaos. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk specifically about women and control. It seems like there's a lot of it, trying to control a lot of things, whether it's what we look like or how things are. How do you think we start to heal that?
I think that
our bodies. I mean, how many women do we know that are, there's so much control of the body, right?
Yeah, right.
How do we start to heal that?
Right. We have to start thinking differently. And, this is something that I've been practicing for a while too, that we are given these messages about how we should look, and these messages of immediacy of products we should buy that will take us from here to there quickly. Healing and transformation and self-love and acceptance is a practice. It's not a quick fix. And it breaks my heart to continue to see so many women investing billions of dollars, millions of dollars in these systems that are made to keep us in a cycle of self-hatred. You're not young enough. You're not thin enough. You're too thin. You're da 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 da. You're not a good mother if you don't constantly self-sacrifice, right? We need to reclaim our authenticity as women. And to do that, it means we need to change the conversation. I don't use the words anti-aging anymore. I'm pro-aging. Anti-aging in itself is self-hatred, that just those two words. If we're lucky enough to age, great. And all ages are beautiful and all ages are important and valuable. And this whole idea of mothers, the only good mothers should be mothers who are constantly self-sacrificing. What are we teaching our daughters when we do that? So I think we really do, as women, have to change the conversation. And that takes some self-inquiry and having these conversations with our friends when these topics come up, challenging them in a way that is open and loving, going back to Ahimsa and Satya, authentic and kind. How do we have these conversations that don't judge anyone for doing what we know, like what we've been conditioned to do, but also open to new possibilities and how we can see ourselves as women? How do we not live a life of control when we're imposing upon ourselves and we're imposed upon by our society all of these impossible ideals? Like, in order to be successful, you have to be in massive control to meet all of those ideals. And I'm just not willing to self-sacrifice anymore. I need to have those healthy boundaries in my life so that I have moments for joy. I can be silly with my grandchild and my husband and my friends. There's no room to be playful and silly when we're always pushing ourselves. There's no room for patience. There's no room for joy.
What would Steph's life look like without yoga?
It's so hard to know. It's been such a part of my life now for 29 years. I never would have thought I was going to be a yoga teacher. I never would have thought that this is something that I would do for this long. And I will always do it. It doesn't matter if I'm paid to do it or if I'm teaching yoga. It's something that I do all day, every day. Because it informs my life and supports my life all of the time. I was interested in self-growth, so I wonder if I would have discovered a different path that hopefully would have led me to the same thing. But I'm super grateful that I found yoga, and I'm super grateful for the teachers that I found along the way who were exactly who I needed at the right time. And that's a big part of yoga that gets forgotten in this country, is to really remember all of your teachers every time you come to your mat, and not just your yoga teachers, but all of the people who have informed your practice. I really feel blessed that the teachers have arrived at the right time in my life and helped me to find enough self-love through the devoted practice to be able to have the awareness and then come to the acceptance of the parts of myself that I was denying, that were no longer serving me.
We hear a lot about self-love and loving yourself, but it's not like a thing it's not a switch, that you could turn on or off. How do people start that process?
Well, like anything, I love the word practice, because it's not It's not yoga perfect. It's not self-love perfect. It's yoga practice. It's self-love practice. And it gets misunderstood. I think we get really confused with advertising. Like, we think self-love is a Dove bar, right? Self-love is radical. It's radical self-acceptance. And it takes practice. And without the ability to feel your feelings, you can't really love yourself. And so I think a lot of us don't have the ability to feel our feelings. What happens for a lot of people when they first start practicing yoga is that this has happened to me many times over the years as well, or I'll have someone come up to me after class and say, I get into Shavasana, which is the final relaxation. I just start crying and I don't know why, and it's scary, or why am I crying? And my understanding and my experience is that many of us just don't have any space in our life to really feel. And so when we can be with ourselves for an hour and just breathe and move and then be still, all of these feelings we've been suppressing, denying, repressing, numbing, distracting, avoiding come forward. And for some people, that's too much. Most people, it's fine with some practice, right? We build resiliency to feel our feelings. But some people will come to me and I'll say, well, this might be something to talk to a therapist about, because I'm not a therapist. I want to make sure that they feel safe in Shavasana. But I had one woman who came to me, and this was when I first started teaching yoga. And then 6 months later, she came, and I suggested maybe therapy because she was really concerned about how much she was feeling in Shavasana. And I kind of forgot about her. And then she came back, and she came to a workshop I did. And 6 months later and said, oh my gosh, thank you so much for suggesting therapy. I was able to talk to my therapist. I've been coming back to yoga. I realized some things that were really important for me to realize. And now I love Shavasana. It's my favorite. So I think for some people, just moving their body and being still brings those feelings forward. But for some people, they need more help than just going to a yoga class.
Yeah, I think yoga dislodges stuck energies in the body too,
Yeah.
Similar to acupuncture, there's a lot of different modalities that do it, but something shifts.
Yeah.
Where there's a release of some sort,
There is a similar chart to an acupuncture chart in yoga of what are called nadis, energy streams. And we have 108 of them that converge to our heart. So there's a lot of energy moving in the body, and that doesn't get talked about as much in Western yoga either, but we have these bandhas, these energy seals that connect energy in the body, and we have energy streams moving through the body. So definitely there is a lot of prana, life force energy that's happening when we're practicing.
Yeah,
It's opening up.
What is trauma-informed yoga?
Trauma-informed yoga, trauma-informed anything is understanding enough about how trauma affects people that if you are working in any capacity with people, that you can start to recognize how people can often be triggered, and if someone is triggered, how you can respond. So trauma-informed yoga would be a yoga class where the teacher has received some training in understanding how to create an environment that feels safer. And some of the things that I do, one, giving choice. People who experience trauma, oftentimes it's traumatic because they didn't have a choice, right? So if you teach a very sort of top-down kind of yoga where you're telling people exactly what to do, how to do it, what to do with your body, it can trigger people's trauma, and they can feel very disempowered. But if you teach a yoga that it offers a lot of options and choices, and you use language that's very awareness-oriented, process-oriented, and choice-oriented, you are going to create a trauma-informed environment where people will feel safer. Some of the other things to consider are, making sure that the lights, it's not too dark in there, whether or not you're going to touch your students is a really important thing, and getting consent if you're going to do that. how well your students know you and trust you if you're going to take that step, and make sure that you do have that consent. These are some of the most important things to consider with trauma-informed yoga. But this can apply, too, to people working in customer service. You know, someone comes in and they get triggered by something, and the way you react, if you react with reactiveness, you're going to just escalate that person's experience. And that experience might be that that person just shuts down and goes away, or that experience might be that they rev up and confront you. So I think it's actually a really just important thing to understand in general in society, because we deal with trauma, people who've experienced trauma all the time.
Yeah, I mean, almost everybody.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Right. So kind of it's a very great skill to have.
Yeah.
What other healing modalities have you tried on your journey?
I've worked with a therapist. I've worked with a spiritual teacher. And I've, like I said earlier, had the blessing to work with yoga teachers who are really insightful, you know, had body work done. But I also think that I've just been interested in learning more. And so I've read a lot and done a lot of self-study as well. One of the practices that I haven't mentioned yet that is near and dear to me in yoga is mantra. And mantra is chanting Sanskrit words. And Sanskrit words in yoga are believed to have a lot of power. The word mantra has been culturally appropriated in the West to mean like any positive affirmation or saying, but the reality is that mantra is only when you chant in Sanskrit. The first time I went to India, the teacher that I worked with, I did 8 sessions a day with, and at the beginning of every hour, we would chant for 20 minutes. And I didn't know what we were chanting. Like, nothing was written down. It was confusing for me, but I loved it. And I found myself after that time, I would be in a grocery store or something, and I would be chanting a mantra or a sutra. And I would go, what is that about? What does that mantra mean? And I would go home and look it up or ask a friend, and it would always have something to do with what I was experiencing, which I thought was really powerful. The other thing about mantra that I really love is that it's primal. If you think about it, humans forever have sounded. We've sung, we've chanted, we've hummed. Until recently, you know, every tribe, every culture has that as part of their way of being. And we have been disconnected from that. And so for me, to be able to find my voice, like I always thought, again, a childhood story was that I don't have a good voice, I shouldn't sing. And so when mantra was introduced, I was very shy about it. But when I just started to chant from my heart with devotion, it really helped to free something for me. It helped me feel like I had a deeper presence or voice. And humming or chanting or mantra helps to up-level more nitric oxide, up to 15 times more, which again is helpful for our blood pressure, our blood flow, our energy, our brain function, and our immunity. It just feels good.
Yeah. One thing that is really important to me is accessibility of healing modalities. Because I feel a lot of times in the West, like you have to pay all this money to get any kind of healing. How do you think we can create more accessibility so it doesn't become a paywall, or, you know, only the people with a certain amount of funds can actually heal and everybody else gets to... how do we create more accessibility?
Yeah. Well, I mean, COVID has created a lot of free yoga online. You just have to really find the teacher that resonates with you. And that's one thing. But the other thing I think that's really important is that we are supporting more teachers who look like the people and talk like the people and are like the people who we want to make yoga accessible to. So one thing we've done at our studio is we fundraise to, we live in a town where we have a high Latino and Hispanic population. And so we fundraise to train a Mexican immigrant, now American citizen person to teach. And for her to bridge that gap of accessibility, she teaches community classes, takes donation. She pairs it with Zumba. So she does 30 minutes of Zumba and 30 minutes of yoga. It's not Zumba yoga, but it's Zumba and yoga. Because then the people that might not feel comfortable with trying the yoga, but she has felt immense benefit from her practice. So she wanted to be able to make it accessible and share it with somebody. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you turn to today when you're struggling?
Breath. Breath and the yamas and niyamas, for sure.
Do you feel you've healed your relationship with your parents?
Yes. My mother passed away 14 years ago. And when she passed away, I still had quite a bit of resentment. But not as much as I had in my 20s. In my 20s, I had a lot of resentment. And part of the resentment that I was having was that I felt like she was modeling for my younger sisters, because she was a fairly high-functioning addict. So I felt like she was modeling for my sisters and encouraging them into drug use and alcohol use. And I was concerned for them. And she said to me, she was a wise person. So she suggested that we go for a weekend alone, and she rented a cabin.
You and your mom?
Yeah. And we had some conversations, and I was honest with her. And she
How old were you there?
Mid-20s, I want to say. She said to me, because I was questioning her drug use with my sisters, and she said to me at one point, she said, I will always love you exactly as you are. Can you love me as I am? And that was a hard thing because, I had a lot of pain growing up because of her as she is. But it also helped me to see that, my non-forgiveness was not serving me or her. And so by the time she passed, I had come to peace with that. I had decided through some therapy to spend time with my mom and my sisters in a way that felt healthy for me. So if there was alcohol and drug use happening, I would only be there for a short period of time and spend time with the kids involved. And then leave before it got to be too uncomfortable for me. My dad and I have become closer as I've gotten older. He wasn't around a lot when we were growing up. So he's still alive, and we have a good relationship. Yeah.
You're a mama to 2 adult daughters and a young boy. How did motherhood change you at those 2 different instances?
Yeah. Gosh. So when I got pregnant with Chloe, my oldest, I had a whole different plan for my life. Traveling the world with my girlfriend and then going to law school. And I was in love with her father, but I wasn't planning on kids. I wasn't planning on marriage. If you would have asked me 3 months before, I would have never said that I would have moved forward with motherhood. But something within me just felt like it was something that I was supposed to do. I can't explain it any other way. And it was one of the best things I ever did. I was able to love myself better through loving her. And I became more important to myself for her. And so I think that was really, really powerful. And both of my daughters were, I'm so close to them. I love them both so, so, so much, and have been such a delight in my life. My son came later in life. I was 41. I'm 56 now. And he's almost 15. And having a boy is a whole different experience. I grew up with sisters and a mother. And so daughters were really second nature to me. Having a boy has been very different. And he's a high feelings boy. And he's an artist at heart. And he's creative. But he's always been one of those kids who's never been super easy. So it's been really, I feel really grateful that I had him at an older age where I had more skills to practice patience, and to be there for him, to be calm for him when he needs that. Yeah, so I think parenting is just a really amazing opportunity to take the practices that heal you and apply them.
Do you feel it's been a big healing journey for you?
I feel like when you come from trauma and the kind of chaos I did, you can go either direction. You can go in the direction of just continuing that pattern, or you can go in the direction of disrupting that pattern. And for whatever reason, I have been blessed with or made choices toward. I remember even in middle school when all that stuff was happening, going, I am not going to live like this. I am not going to live like this. And I think that was a huge negative teaching for me, and made me determined to choose other paths. But I'm also glad that I was open to changing the path, like not going to law school. I don't think that would have served me as a mother. I tried to do law for a while as a mother, and it was not supporting motherhood well. I was on a big case where I was supposed to go to trial for 4 months in Arizona, and I had 2 young kids, and they just said, well, we'll just fly the kids down on the weekends. And I was like, that's not the mother I want to be. I want to see my kids every day. So I was glad that I chose a different direction.
Do you feel your healing journey has influenced your raising of your kids, and how?
Definitely. I think that, I have been honest with them about what's happened in my life, and concern, for them in terms of, addiction can be something that can be passed on. So I've always tried to be really honest and really trying to help them to have awareness around how they show up in life. And I just think, again, like I've said, I think yoga allows you to have more patience. And patience is one of the most important things as a parent. I think one of the worst things you can do for a child is be impatient. It kills their self-esteem because they need to learn and grow and develop. And if you don't give them the space and time to do that, like if they're constantly being rushed through the things that take time for them to learn and grow into, then they don't feel like they have the space to feel their feelings, to learn how to tie their shoes, to do whatever they need to do. And it's hard, like we talked about earlier, as women who have a lot on our plate that we think that we need to live up to have patience. But I think that the yoga has been a really good thing for that. And I haven't always been patient. I'm not trying to say that I've always been patient. It's a practice.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a practice.
What are you doing differently as a grandmother versus as a mother?
Oh, my goodness. I know people say this and you don't really get it until you're there, but it's just so much joy. So much joy. I just love that little girl so much. Like there's just something, got to be there when she was born, and we've just had this really strong connection. And it's so fun to hold space for her. And this is one thing I didn't mention about one of the gems of my childhood was my grandmother, my dad's mom. She was the one adult growing up who always made me feel really important and special. And I just adored her. And so to be able to give Winona that, I just do adore her. I mean, she is just amazing. And so I've always wanted to be that grandmother to a child. Or really, and it's made me think about, like, what if we could be that for everyone? What if we could make everyone feel that special and adored, and worthy of our attention? I mean, that's a hard thing to do, but for children, I don't think we realize as adults how impactful that is for children. To have an adult that really sees you and really gets you and really appreciates you. Because we're just like kind of pushed here and there and doing this and that and da-da-da-da as little kids. But for me, it was really impactful. My grandma and then that 6th grade teacher I mentioned, who also saw something in me and really supported me. I feel like I could have gone another direction if it weren't for those two people in my life. I could have gone the direction of addiction and the consequences of that. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. What's the role of teachers and mentors on the healing journey? Because you touched on that briefly.
Yeah. I think that it depends, in terms of teachers and mentors, it depends on the role and the relationship. So most of the teaching I do with people is in a group. And so it's a little less direct and personal, but I also think that gives people space to really explore their own growth. And a lot of people have come to me and said, oh my gosh, that thing that you said, or, have come to me and said that really that this moment or this accumulation of moments has really been life-changing for me. So I like that group aspect. And then there's opportunity for more one-on-one. That's working with a teacher or a mentor one-on-one, I think is really powerful, but also very personal and takes a lot of responsibility in that way. Sometimes for me, as someone coming from trauma, that's felt like a little too much responsibility. I tend to prefer the group environment. I have worked one-on-one with people. And then the kind of in-between of that is teacher training. So I've been training teachers for 25 years, and that's when you have a small group, but it's more personal over a period of time. It's a smaller group than a class, and we're spending 200 hours together, and I've seen some real transformation in that. People that have really discovered the awareness and the acceptance that leads to the grace of transformation through. That also gives us a chance to get into more of the philosophy and to practice more of the 8 limbs of yoga, not just the asana and the pranayama, the breath. But I think the role as a teacher is really important because you have to have a sense for understanding what people are ready for. Like, we're not always ready to accept the shadows in our psyche. We're not always ready to see those. We have to have developed enough of a sense of safety to be able to go there. And so in working with small groups where we have these kinds of conversations, we call them satsang, having a sense for where to go is really important because, you just don't want to go somewhere too soon, and yet you want to keep moving forward. And I think that the best one-on-one people, therapists and teachers that I've worked with, have understood that and known when to push me and when to support me. And that can be done in a group environment as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that saying, when you're ready for the lesson, the teacher appears.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's been very true in my life.
Yeah.
You started the Sustainable Asana Yoga Foundation. Can you tell us about how maybe a little bit about that and how that supported your healing?
Sure. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So acronym SAFE Yoga. About, I don't know, 15 years ago, I started to really be curious about, okay, first of all, I've always really felt strongly and passionately that movement should be accessible to people. And I would see someone come into a class and you could tell it was their first time. They were really nervous. They'd sat up in the back. They were intimidated. And these were classes I was taking. And then, 20 minutes into class, they'd sort of duck out. It wasn't something that was comfortable for their body, or for whatever reason, it was too much, too soon. And so for me, I've always felt really like it's really important for everyone to feel welcome and successful. And what I started to learn is that most yoga teachers are not taught human movement mechanics. They might be taught, where the muscles are or the names of the bones, but that doesn't teach you anything about how to adapt poses for different bodies. Knowing the names of muscles and bones doesn't teach you that. So knowing human movement mechanics, like what is load, what is range of motion, what is joint integrity, what can injure a joint. It's actually pretty simple once you understand that you can modify any pose by either decreasing the range of motion or decreasing the load. Well, how do you decrease the load? You provide more external support. So this program that I developed over the last 6.5 years with 2 partners is a 21-chapter quiz after every chapter, 61 videos, lots of images, all about human movement mechanics, and also about what we talked about earlier, the subtle energy, the bandhas, and how those bandhas naturally align our bodies. And then also looking at some of the riskier poses and not throwing those poses out. It's not an all or nothing, but respecting the risks and understanding how to give options and progressions into those poses that heal and don't harm, right? Ahimsa. Why are we pushing ourselves so hard in Western yoga that people get injured and then they miss out on everything that I benefited from? Like, if you get injured the first time you come to a yoga class, you're not going to ever come to the awareness and the acceptance. So this is where my passion came from. It is that, like, yoga healed and transformed my life. If I wouldn't have had such good teachers in the beginning, I might not have stuck with it. If I would have gotten that knee injury, that shoulder injury, that lower back injury. And injuries are happening in asana classes, but yoga is so much more than asana that if we can't make asana accessible to people truly because we don't know enough, it's not that teachers are trying to do that, of course. They just don't have the education. And until recently, that education wasn't even required by Yoga Alliance. And now recently they've added in that you need to understand some biomechanics. So yeah, it's a passion of mine. So I developed this program to make it more accessible and affordable for people, because if you want to go try to get biomechanics training, it can be really expensive.
Yeah. What do you do to bring more joy into your life?
I play. I mountain bike. Love mountain biking. I get outdoors. I wake surf, which is something I discovered a few years ago, which is super fun. I love the outdoors. I live in a town that is a resort town where we have access to so many amazing hikes, waterfalls, mountain bike rides. I ski. And I now make time in my life to relax enough that I can be silly. I mean, I think that's so important. For me, growing up the way I grew up, I didn't know how to laugh. Like, I really didn't. Like, people would be laughing and I was like, that's funny. But I wouldn't laugh. And it took being silly with my children to laugh for like the first time in my life, really, really, you know? And so I recognize when I'm not laughing that I'm back in that high achieving, over functioning control, success mode. And I do have a lot going on in my life. I own businesses, and so I have to really check in with myself and notice, am I making space in my life for joy? And not just once a month, but daily or weekly, like really prioritizing that.
Yeah.
I deserve it.
It's a practice, right?
It is a practice. We all deserve it.
What would you say to a teenager or a young adult that has had an equally challenging childhood?
To be kind with your child self. And that's the opposite of what I felt as a teenager. I felt shame. Unfortunately, as when women suffer sexual assault, I felt shame. I didn't know how to tell anybody. I didn't know how to process it. I felt like I was always doing something wrong. And for a long time, I felt shame. And I didn't feel worthy of love and belonging. And although these things happened to me, I felt like I somehow could have prevented them. And there was a few that I definitely couldn't have prevented. And, this is trauma. This is trauma defined, in that we feel like helpless in a sense. And so I think that it's really important that if young people are experiencing trauma, that they are just kind to themselves, and to realize that whatever you're doing right now to cope, you're doing because in some way it's serving you or been serving you, but it doesn't have to be what you do forever to cope. There are better ways to cope. Eventually I chose differently than drinking or drinking too much, doing too much, caring too much what I look like, all of those things that are harmful to ourselves, that are self-hatred essentially. And then we shift to things that are truly self-love. And I think we mistake oftentimes things that, and unfortunately we're given the message in media in a million ways that if you're having a bad day, get a glass of wine. Well, what if you're having a bad day? Take a hot bath and breathe. There's so many other ways that we can self-soothe and take care of ourselves that are long-term going to serve us better than the short-term fixes. And so I would just say kindness, patience. I also would say that, we talked about accessibility earlier. Like if you're a young person and yoga is something that's of interest to you, seek out a mentor, seek out a studio that will support you or offer you a scholarship. We do that kind of work at my studio. Most yoga teachers have a very altruistic nature and will definitely, if you are sincere, will make it work regardless of your income status for you. And I've had a couple teenage students who have come to me and who have had really major life transforming experiences through incorporating yoga, even in high school, and then even went on to become yoga teachers, and one is now in medical school. And so I think it can be healing at any age. Movement is important. If yoga doesn't feel safe for you, I have to say this too, that a lot of people who've experienced trauma will not feel safe in some yoga classes.
Or just slowing down in general.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So meditation is not something that a lot of people who've experienced trauma can access. Restorative yoga can be too still for people. Sometimes starting with a more vigorous practice can be helpful. Because what has been communicated to me is that, and I started with more of a vinyasa practice, so I don't know, I didn't come right into restorative yoga, but I've had people that I know who've experienced trauma who went to restorative yoga and they're like, I just can't be still like that. I just can't be still like that. Shavasana can be hard for people to be still in. So it's important that maybe, a lot of teachers are now trauma-informed, but seeking out somebody who understands that.
I couldn't sit still it took me a long time to build up a meditation practice.
Yeah.
I could not sit still at the beginning.
And I love to sit and meditate, but I love to walk in nature and meditate.
That's a different kind of meditation. Yeah, for sure. How do you make space for feeling?
So I think that how yoga has been helpful for me in that way is because it's difficult to make space for feeling when you don't know that you are repressing feelings, that you have been consistently numbing and distracting your feelings.
Kind of going.
Or just, plowing ahead and not making space, is by combining movement and breath. What happens is you get into a brainwave state where you're present. It's called the flow state in psychology, right? So when we move and breathe together, vinyasa yoga, kriya yoga, we get into it's sort of like a semi-hypnotic state, but it's a higher consciousness state. And you are coming into the state of yoga. And the state of yoga is presence. Again, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra 1.1 says yoga occurs in the now. Yoga is the stopping, the cessation of the fluctuations, the stories, the identities of the mind. We are constantly having the same thoughts today that we had yesterday. Harvard did a study that showed that women have on average 80,000 thoughts a day, and men have on average 50,000 thoughts a day. And a really high percentage, I don't know the exact percentage, of those thoughts are the exact same thoughts you had as you had yesterday.
Wow.
So we have all these pattern thoughts that are constantly clouding our mind. And so until we can slow those thoughts or stop those thoughts, we can't recognize that a lot of those thoughts are not wholly true. So this relates to the feelings because our feelings are affected by our thoughts. So once we start to do practices that slow those thoughts or stop those thoughts, then we can start to check in, well, I'm not feeling in relationship to that thought. What am I feeling in this moment? How am I feeling in this moment? Most of our negative feelings are related to the past or the future. They're not related to right now. And so a lot of our negative feelings are related to past thoughts and future thoughts, not really what's happening right now, unless right now I'm experiencing something really challenging, right? But most of the time right now is not really the problem.
You're anticipating something or
right. Right. I think it's Eckhart Tolle who says that all stress and anxiety come from living too much in the future and not enough in the now. And all non-forgiveness and resentment and guilt come from living too much in the past and not enough in the now. Yoga is the now. That is what the practice of yoga is. So practicing yoga creates space in your mind and your body for feeling. And sometimes those feelings come forward intentionally, but most of the times they come forward unintentionally. They're just you're just becoming aware of them. Remember, awareness is the first step. And then it's a matter of being with those feelings and starting to recognize the root of the feelings and the root of your suffering, if you're suffering.
So there's a lot of different movement that people can do, right? You can go for a run, you can go skiing, there's so many different types of movement. Not everything unlocks that like yoga. How is yoga different than a million other types of movement you can do? Because you're breathing and you're moving.
Right.
When you go on a run, you're doing both of those things.
Right.
How is yoga different than that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You can get into a flow state in some of those other modalities. I definitely experience it on my mountain bike. If I'm not present, that's when I can be injured. And so I do think that different movement modalities can be helpful for coming into a flow state and clearing your mind and, building resiliency in your body. Where yoga can be different is especially if you tend toward, when faced with a challenge, coming into a state that's reactive with the guidance of a teacher or with your own breath practice. You can meet that challenge with breath. And when we meet the challenge with breath, and some of the other practices that help us, like pratyahara is a practice of sense withdrawal. So not being distracted by the hot or the cold or that sound over there, being really focused. When we meet those challenges with these other supportive practices, it can help us build resiliency off the mat. I do think that different movement modalities can be helpful, but they don't always, especially if you're doing them very competitively. Like for me, if I'm starting to compare or compete, I lose that state of presence that I could find. And sometimes we're just competing with ourselves in terms of like, oh, I'm going to beat my running time or this or this or this. And that can take away from the experience of just being wholly present with the activity.
What really made a difference for you and broke you free from your past? Because obviously you had two sisters, their paths have been different. What was really different for you?
It was a lot of things, as I've mentioned, but one of the things I think that really made a difference for me was sort of the self-determination that I chose in my youth. And I think I had to choose it more than my sister did, because my sisters will share with me sometimes that they don't remember a lot of this stuff. They don't even, they were younger than me, so they didn't really understand what was happening. I was the older one, so I was kind of taking care of them during some of these times and understood more of what was actually happening. So I think since I had more responsibility, I knew and understood more of what wasn't working and chose differently at an early age. I wonder if it's a birth order thing, or if it's a luck thing that I found the teachers that I found and the practices that I found. Yeah.
I like how you called out self-determination, like you had that. Where do you think that came from? Where do you think the self-determination came from at such a young age?
I think that those adults that I mentioned that showed me that I was worthy of love and belonging.
Like your grandma?
My grandma and my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Hampel. I think that's why it's so important to be that light for a child whenever you can, in whatever relationship you have. Some kids just really need to be seen. And if we don't have a sense of self, how can we be self-determined? If we don't have a good sense of self-esteem, how can we make choices for ourselves in that way? And I know that, teachers can be really impactful that way, but aunts, grandmas.
Yeah, it really just takes one person, right? Believing in you.
One person can really make a difference. My husband's a high school teacher, and he will have students now and then that will get a hold of him that say, "Oh, you made such a difference in my life." And he's like, "Really?" Like that, like he didn't understand at the time how just helping that person at that moment, who, whatever was going on in their personal lives, who needed to be seen and felt important and to be shown a new skill, how impactful that can be.
Thank you, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
I appreciate
Thanks
you
for having me.
this conversation with me.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. You can connect with Into Healing on TikTok and Instagram for more inspirational and behind-the-scenes content, and visit our website, intohealing.com, for transcripts and other goodies. Into Healing is made possible thanks to people like you. Contributions made through Venmo @IntoHealing or through our website, intohealing.com, help us bring you more inspiring episodes. This has been Into Healing with Mira Adura. Thank you for joining us.